let's keep the baseball talk going here. Jeff needed to find somebody who knows more than me, at least, to talk about. So we got Pat McCarthy to join us, radio broadcaster for the New York Mets. Pat, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, guys. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Are you all packed for London?
Not yet. I'm going to start packing probably on Monday because I have to go to DC Tuesday morning. I am what's the word I'm looking for? A classic late packer and overpacker. So I have to
Okay.
make sure that I have everything prepared.
So you bring way too much and do it right
Way too
before you're
much.
about to go to the airport last minute kind of guy?
No, I always get to the airport on time.
Okay.
Let me clarify. Uh,
I
I'm
try.
I'm an efficient airline traveler. So I have TSA pre-check, so I know kind of how to like time things out, but I don't often check bags. So a lot of times if I don't have to check a bag, I'm more of like an hour and a half type of guy. But this time I'm taking the train down to DC. I'm gonna meet the team in DC, and then we'll all fly to London on Wednesday after the game.
I like the fact that you like switched your answer as if somebody's going to fact check you. You could say whatever you want. You
So
could say, "Look, I never miss a flight, and I get there 2 minutes beforehand." Nobody's going to know.
now I've never missed a flight.
Yeah.
However, I used to be like have severe anxiety when it came to flying. Like it used to freak me out. So I need to be there like 2 hours, 2.5 hours early minimum, like sitting at my gate. And eventually I was just like, okay, this is ridiculous. What are we doing here? So now, yeah, I would say as long as I'm not checking a bag, I'm like an hour and a half beforehand, sometimes less, sit back, relax, and then get on my flight.
Well, good thing you chose a career where you don't have to travel a lot.
No, very
Yeah,
rarely.
yeah.
No,
So
very much at
I
home.
I was at until last night. I was at the last Mets game that they won. Unfortunately, and I only say unfortunately because I left in the ninth inning. So, Jason, feel free to have fun with me about that. But
Oh,
but
no comment.
it's been rough for the Mets over the beginning of the season. A lot of struggles that I don't think anybody anticipated. What do you see as what happened so far?
Yeah, I think it's been a combination of a lot of things. That I think the main issue comes down to is just inconsistency because when they get great starting pitching, they don't hit. When they get great starting pitching and great effort from the bullpen, they don't hit. When they do hit, sometimes the starter throws well, but the bullpen doesn't throw well. So they just really haven't had one of those games where everything has come together. Uh, they've been ravished by injuries once again, like we saw last year. You haven't had Kodai Senga yet all season. You just got David Peterson and Tyler McGill back, who are supposed to be pretty important depth pieces in that starting rotation. Francisco Alvarez has been out for the last 6 weeks. You lost Brooks Raley for the season very early, and he was a really important part of that bullpen. And then, as big as it's been, Edwin Diaz has not been Edwin Diaz yet. So there's a combination of a lot of things. I think the fact that you haven't gotten your big four going all at the same time, and Lindor, Alonso, McNeil, and Nimmo, they've all shown different stretches where they can carry your team. But for the team to go back and win 101 games like we saw back in 22, all four are going to have to put together seasons where they can all kind of be clicking at the exact same time. And then, because then you throw JD Martinez in that mix as well, and he's been pretty consistent. He's been the JD Martinez that they expected him to be, but they just haven't gotten everybody going at the same time. And I think that's the biggest issue.
Do you think that this meeting that Lindor called the other day is going to help? Because the one thing that we know down here is that this Philadelphia locker room is they're all rowing in the same direction. They all seem to be enjoying it. Do the Mets have the possibility to turn this around because the locker room can solidify?
Well, I think it starts there. I think that, baseball, for as much of it's an individual sport, it's a total team sport as well. I mean, as we've seen from clubs around the league, you can have the best player in baseball. You could potentially have the best two players in baseball and not make the playoffs. I mean, as much as individual stats and performance drive the game, you need the guys behind you to also be holding their own weight and getting things done. So I think it starts there. I think the fact that they had the team meeting the other day and then Francisco came out with a 4-for-4 performance last night with a home run, I think that does say something about him, that he's able not just to, he can walk the walk and can also talk the talk. So um, I hope so. I hope that turns things around, and I hope that's what gets this team moving in the right direction. Because and this is a really important stretch coming up. Because all of a sudden we're going to get back from London in a week, 10 days, and we're going to be in the middle of June. And from there, it's like you have to kind of be you have an idea of which direction you're moving in with 6 weeks until the trade deadline. So they've got 2 months to kind of figure this out, but you'd have to think that really they have about 3 weeks.
Well, and you were somebody who got to see this Phillies team up close when the Mets played them in that weird split series, two in New York, two in Philly, and then you'll head to London. Talk about what you've seen from this team. Obviously, off to the hot start, 30 and 39 and 18 record, even after their 2-4 road trip where they seem to scuffle a little bit. They're still 6 games up on the Braves, who lost Acuna. What are you seeing out of the Phillies team?
Well, number one, I think right now, just with the lead that the Phillies have built, it's their division to lose. So I think, for the last couple of years, the thought process for the organization and for the fans has been they just figure out a way to get into the playoffs. I think right now you have to have the eyes set on the division because just the way that the Braves are, again, ravished by injuries, to a much larger scale than a lot of teams around the league. The fact that you lost Strider for this season, and now that you lose Acuna, so not only did you lose a Cy Young contender, you just lost the reigning National League MVP, and not just for a short period of time, but for the entire year. Now the Braves have proven that they can overcome those injuries and figure out a way to still win the division and ultimately win the World Series like they did without Acuna back in 21. But I think the Phillies have put themselves in a situation where they can, not only win the division, but potentially finish with the best record in the National League and get that bye for however you want to look at what that bye means. I think that's the position that the Phillies have put themselves in. It has to do with the fact that the role players, I think, have stepped up in huge ways, whether that's guys like Cody Clemens and Edmundo Sosa. They seem like they've really stepped in with the absence of Trey Turner. And then, of course, it's Nick Castellanos is starting to figure things out. It seems like Kyle Schwarber's hit a couple of home runs.
Careful saying that name around Jeff. He gets shaky.
I'll be sure to avoid it. But then guys like Alec Bohm are having not just all-star seasons, but potentially MVP caliber seasons. So when guys that are not expected to perform at the level in which they are and are sustaining it, I think that's what makes the Phils such a dangerous team, especially when the fact that you think about that the bullpen hasn't been great, and the starting pitching has really just been the backbone of the team over the last couple of years, and especially this year.
I actually want to go back to a conversation that we had the beginning of last year, spring training. There were all these rules going into effect, and you were very good at explaining to us what you thought was going to happen, and that you were learning it yourself, how helpful it was coming from the minor leagues to have seen some of those experiments. Now that this has all been in place for a year and a half, what are you thinking about the rules and those rule changes, and about how most of the players have adjusted to them?
Yeah, I think at this point I don't even think about them, right? Like I don't even look for a shift violation. I don't look for the pitch clock. Gosh, I couldn't even tell you how many pitch clock violations we've had this year. I want to say it's only a handful. It just doesn't happen very often. Guys have kind of figured out ways to manipulate it and work with it. Who knows if the pitch-com malfunctions that we have are actually pitch-com malfunctions, or they figured out a way to get around the rules a little bit. But no, I think it's been great for the game. I think it's definitely picked up the pace of the game. And a lot of people talk about just the timing of the games too, that they're shorter. The pace is what's better. And I think that's the most important thing, is we're not waiting, minutes upon minutes in between pitches. I mean, there's a tempo to the games, and I think that's what people want. I'd have to dive deeper into the statistics to see if they've actually, what the average differences are and stuff like that. But baseball is ever changing. We're seeing it this year with the obstruction rules and how first basemen are setting up at first base on pickoffs to avoid any kind of ambiguity. So, the game's ever changing. The game is adapting to the new generation. And I love the quality of the game right now. And I hope it's just going to keep getting better.
From your perspective, from you and your colleagues, has it changed the way that you call a game? We're used to, and I'm about to really date myself, and I'll ask you a question about this later. I can recall Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy being the guys that called the Mets games. There was a lot of time between pitches to talk. Now there's not so much time, I would assume, to talk. And you really, just like we all have to focus on the game as fans, you have to focus on the game more. Have you noticed that there is an adjustment with your colleagues in the way that the game
Yeah.
is called?
Yeah. I think the storytelling aspect of it is much different. When
Unless you're John Kruk, you just talk through
well,
whatever.
but it's TV, so that's the difference, right? With TV,
Right.
you have that luxury that you can talk over pitches. On the radio, we don't have that luxury. As we do things a little bit differently with the Mets is that we have two play-by-play people doing the game at all times. We don't have a former player on the air. So the analyst role, quote unquote, number two role is a bit different just because you don't have as much time to interject and you don't have as much time to kind of add color to the stadium. And that's what made, Bob, Ralph, and Lindsay so great is that they were just constant. They were your eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was their goal. So we have to focus much more on the aspects of the game itself. I think for Keith and I, who both came from the minor leagues and a lot of times worked solo, it's a little bit easier. But for a guy like Howie, he's been doing it for one way for 30 plus years. So there's definitely an adjustment period. Um, I think we're starting to figure it out. I think we've figured out our cadences. I think we've figured out our tempos and our rhythms. But yeah, it was definitely an adjustment period. But more than anything, back in 22 when the rules first were implemented at the minor league level, there was definitely an adjustment level there. I think at this point, we've kind of adapted to what the pace of the game is, and just made sure that hey, we're watching the clock too, and that we're making sure that when the pitcher is set, we're back at the mound.
You're somebody who watches a ton of baseball. We talked to Jamie Moyer a few weeks ago about the change in pitching and max effort versus going 5 and 6 innings. And then you see this Phillies starting staff with an ERA of 2.73. They've got 18 starts of 7+ innings, 18 starts of 6+ innings. That 18 starts of 7+ innings, only 10 teams had that in all of 2023. That was more than 10 teams. Can you talk about what it does for not just the starters, but the bullpen and the rest of the lineup when you have your anchors that are going that deep each game?
Yeah, I think that anytime you consistently have to ask your bullpen to get 12 outs, they're going to be tasks and they're going to run into arm trouble and they're going to be tired and they're going to hit walls. It's just natural. So, and depending on how a bullpen is structured as well, a lot of guys out there either have no options left or they're optionable pitchers. So you have your mainstays that are going to be out there every single night. And if they don't have any options left, if you use them twice, 2 days in a row, chances are they're down and you don't really have a ton of wiggle room. So if you need to continue to ask your bullpen to get 12, even 9 outs at a time, eventually you're going to run into issues where you're going to have to make decisions, and guys that are potentially pitching well are going to have to be optioned out just because they have options, or guys are going to be DFA'd just because they don't have any options left and you need to bring new guys in. So I do think it messes with the continuity a little bit, but more than anything, I think it overexposes guys as well. One of the benefits to relievers is a lot of times they're hidden. If guys are kind of coming out of the woodwork and nobody has a ton of, film on them, which is hard in this day and age because they have scouting reports on everybody. But it's like a bench player. When you overuse a bench player, a lot of times pitchers figure out how to get them out. Same thing can be said about relievers. If you have to constantly run out relievers, the book's out on them. And they figure out, okay, he might have a nasty split finger that we hadn't seen up until this year, but all of a sudden we figured out how to pick it up. And he doesn't become as effective as he was when they didn't necessarily have, all of the tape on him early on. So yeah, I think it's an amazing benefit to have a starting pitching crew that throws strikes. It keeps the defense engaged, but it allows them to go late in the game. So that way you do have your relievers for the most part, night in and night out when you need them.
All right, so let's talk about the lineup construction. Jeff has lost the battle of Kyle Schwarber should not be a leadoff hitter. He's now hitting 280 with 5 home runs when leading off this season. Alec Boehm playing better than many people thought that he would. Going back, I mean, you saw him in the minors, what people thought he would in terms of his defense at third base. Jeff loses his mind over my love of JT Realmuto and his now 17-game hitting streak. Talk about the horses on this team who are actually showing up now. And, those bats and went silent last year in the playoffs. Is it why do baseball teams seem to go from all on to these crazy slumps where they just can't hit anything? What is it about baseball?
It's a great question. I do think hitting is contagious. For what reason, I don't know. It just seems that, and maybe it's that because the pitchers are just easy to pick up in that situation. Like there's just so many variables that run into a baseball season, right? There's weather, there's the pitcher that day, there's injuries that crop up that we don't necessarily know about. There's shadows. There's just all these like random things that factor into a game that sometimes like it causes just an entire lineup to go cold. And for sometimes some guy just has it that day. Like for some reason he's able to spin the baseball better than he was in previous days. So I don't know. I'm sure somebody a lot smarter than me has actually studied why it happens that way, but it's true. It does. That for some reason, when one guy goes cold, all of a sudden two or three guys go cold, and a team runs into a stretch where they can't hit. So that's I think what makes baseball so special. That's why we have to play 162 games, is because eventually there's going to be so many peaks and valleys in a season that for a 1 week stretch, a team's going to look like the worst team in baseball, and then all of a sudden they're the A's and rallying off 20 consecutive victories. Like it's just I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you because it's very curious, and I do think again it goes back to kind of what I said earlier, that it's the ultimate individualized team sport, that there is a sense of there's an ego to it, that a guy says like, well, I'm not going to be the one that makes the out. If there's 7 guys up there that are getting hits, the 8th guy is going to say, well, I'm not going to be the one that ruins it. I'm going to go up there. So I do think there is an aspect to that. To go back to your question about like lineup construction, I just think we've gotten away from the traditional lineup construction. I just don't think the prototypical leadoff hitter is what the prototypical leadoff hitter was anymore, just because of there's this massive emphasis on base percentage. So you're going to throw guys up there that get on base and just set the tone for the guys behind them. And the other thing is it's a lot of it's matchup based, right? Because there's so many specialists out there, and you need to even with the 3 batter rule, you need to construct your lineup in a way that you're not going to get caught late in a game with a left-hander coming up, and all of a sudden you don't have a right-handed hitter to go to on your bench. So it's a really interesting way of that's why managers, I think that's how they can really put their fingerprints in the game, is how they figure out a lineup. And whether that's putting Kyle Schwarber in the leadoff spot, or Carlos Mendoza with the Mets the other day just made a massive flip, and he moved Brandon Nimmo out of the leadoff spot, somewhere that he's been for pretty much his entire career, and he took Francisco Lindor out of the 3-hole with the hope that it was going to kind of shake things up, and it had an instant impact. For what reason, I don't know. But Lindor, who was hitting below the Mendoza line for most of the season, all of a sudden over the last 2 weeks is a 300 hitter again. So it's just, there's all these little wacky things that just go into the mindset of a baseball player that can just switch things up a little bit.
One of the things about baseball, at least what baseball's trying to do, in addition to try to make the game more compact or move better, is focus on the personalities. You're lucky enough to cover a couple real personalities. The Mets have, as you mentioned, Lindor, but to me, Pete Alonso seems to be a guy who absolutely loves playing baseball. What's it like to cover guys that have that kind of infectious personality?
Yeah, it's the fun part of the game because you get to know them beyond who they are on the field. So like a guy like Pete is, he's just like a little kid out there, playing, and that's how he plays the game. He plays the game hard. He's ultra competitive. I mean, just think about the fact that 2 days ago he gets hit in the knuckle, and you're thinking, okay, he's done for 6 weeks. That's your initial thought when it happens. Then all of a sudden the scans come back okay, and it's like, yeah, no, he could be available tonight because it's just a bone bruise. And then he steps up and hits a double that ultimately scores the tying run in game one against the Diamondbacks. So it's like, so guys like Pete, you just have so much respect for because they are just gamers and they're just built differently, that they go out and they play the game the right way. He goes out and, he's not afraid to show emotion. It's funny. I had like a reverse take on emotion in the game. When I was a young kid, I probably had the approach of an older gentleman when it came to the game, like, oh, be there, but act like you've been there before and drop your head and run. I'm like, that was the dumbest take I've ever had in my entire life. Like, baseball is so much better when players are showing emotion and showing personality. And that's when you get the conversation of, oh, back in the day, if he had done that, he would have gotten hit in the ribs. Well, yeah, he would have, but that's not the game today. And you know what? If a guy wants to take it into his own hands and brush somebody back, all right, so be it. Those are the unwritten rules of the game. But the next guy and his best player is going to do the same thing as well when he hits a ball into the second deck. So I think it just, baseball needs to be more fun. It's a gentleman's game, sure, I guess. I don't know. But like, put some emotion into it. Have some fun. That's what I love about Francisco Alvarez, who goes out there every day. Once the Mets get him back, he's going to be a lightning rod in that lineup. Not just because he's a catcher that can hit 25 home runs, but he just brings an energy to the ballpark every single night that you can't fake. Francisco Lindor's the same way. I mean, the guy plays with flair, and baseball needs more personalities in the game. So it's exciting to watch. I'm grateful for it because it makes my job a lot more fun as well.
I mean, I think that's part of why the fans like this Phillies team so much. Obviously, the winning, everybody loves a winner. But I said to Jeff, I want to see this team win because I want them to be remembered for the fun that they had in this city and the way that they were playing, sort of like we do with the '08 team here. With, I mentioned last week to Jeff, Pat Burrell wasn't Mr. Smiley that everybody thought he was the best personality when he's here. And now he's beloved for the dog and the parade and so like those things happen when you win together. The personalities of the team are embedded on the city. We talk before we let you go, we talk a lot about players' journeys. You've had your own journey that had a cool moment like a week or two ago. You had gotten hit by a vehicle, had your own recovery, and you got to bring the doctors to the Phillies game to celebrate. Can you talk about your own recovery and what that moment was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, huge thank you to the Phillies for helping set that up because I mean they were instrumental in making sure that we were able to have that night um, with all my docs and nurses from Capital Health. Yeah, I mean I wouldn't be here without them. I mean they took one of the worst moments of my entire life and turned it into a blessing. The team at Capital Health in Trenton were just unbelievable. I was there for 9 days and they cared for me, every step of the way. So, my two surgeons, Dr. Quinlan and Kelly I mean, they were amazing. They were miracle workers for what they did to make sure that I was up and moving again. So for us, just to be able to have them out there, they were able to have the entire trauma team out there. It was a really full circle moment. To be able to host them and give them an opportunity just to see the impact that they had on my life for me and my family to get back to our everyday lives and a little bit of a sense of normalcy. So it was a really special moment. I've been able to develop a really tight relationship with those guys just because, well, we spent a lot of time together for 9 days in the hospital. But yeah, they were unbelievable. I tell people all the time they took the worst experience of my life and made it tolerable. If that's like the best way that I can put it. But it's just because it's a testament to the care and the compassion that the doctors, the nurses, everybody, the security people showed. So, it's a funny story. So my family was unbelievable. My wife, Emily, never left my side for 9 days. She slept in the hospital every single night. Uh, and the hospital staff never even questioned it. They never said anything about it. It was just like, okay. And my family were there basically from 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock when visiting hours were there. So it got to the point within like a day or two that the security guards at the front desk had all of their passes already printed. So that way each day they could just hand them to them as they walked in. So the team at Capitol Health was unbelievable for everything that they did and continued to be, for the last, couple of months since I've had to go for, follow-up visits and stuff like that. They still know who I am when I walk in and stuff like that. Um, it was a really special day for us just to be able to thank the people that made such an impact on my life to make sure that I was able to get back and do what I love to do at, such a quick time.
And Pat, you are so good at it. I remember sitting with Jason in the press box years ago and saying, someday he's going to be doing some major league game. Didn't know where. I'm happy it's with the Mets. But I have one quick question. If you, because I told you before, I grew up with these voices. Which one's your favorite? Bob Murphy, Ralph Kiner?
Oh, that's not fair to ask.
Wow, that's a great question. I because you hear about all three together, right? Like that's like they're kind of lumped into one group.
Yeah.
But I haven't listened to Lindsey enough just because he was there the shortest period of time. But I can remember because Ralph was still around when I was younger. He would still pop into the SNY booth. So to me, like he's the one that I remember because he would come into the SNY booth every once in a while. And I can remember watching Met games and he would be in there. But to me, I have gone back and I've listened to different broadcasts over the years. And I love that everybody has their own Bob Murphy impression. And it's kind of how in Philadelphia, everybody has their own Harry Callis. In New York, everybody has their own Bob Murphy. So that has been the funniest thing for me is like, you think of it almost as like a caricature when people are doing this and you're like, oh, wow, he actually said those things. But I'm just blessed to be able to be able to walk into a radio booth every day with Bob's name. And when you look right to your right, you see a big photo of the three of them all standing together because I mean, they got the Mets broadcast off and running. We're able to do what we do because of, Bob, Ralph, and Lindsey. Like they're the reason that we're capable of it. So I can't say that I have a favorite of the three. I think I have I'm just fortunate because that I'm able to work in, even though it's not the same booth as them, and a booth it's honored for Bob Murphy.
Well, we know you got to head out of here. We wish you continued great recovery. We hope you're able to get all packed into the airport on time to get to London, and look forward to keep talking to you about everything.
Yeah, thanks guys.